Hello everybody, my name's David Flaherty. I'm with Scanning Pens. Thank you for joining us today. We're in Walla Walla Public Schools and I've had the honor of meeting with Holly Anderson today. Holly and I met a couple years ago now, and it was kind of interesting. I was down in this area and I just gave him a call and said, hey, can I swing by? And she graciously allowed me to come in, and she had a couple teachers join us. And that day, I believe you started off with the trial of the, I think we got 5 pens. We took 3 of the readers and a couple of our lingo pen. What we do is we have an assistive technology called the text-to-speech tool called the Reader Pen that is really becoming very successful across the country. And what we're finding in the stories we're hearing, that it's really making a difference in a lot of kids' lives. And I think we might even have some teachers here in a little bit that might talk about that, and I hope we can. So Holly, well, what I'd like to do is just kind of talk a little bit about, first off, your background, because in talking with you, I've been kind of blown away by many of the things that you do, and we'll just kind of make this a conversation. So tell me a little bit about Holly and your journey in education.
Well, I'm a speech and language pathologist. I've been working in this field for 25 years and in a variety of places, and been able to start to shift my focus towards helping students who have complex communication needs to be able to access their curriculum and just participate in their classes. And that kind of developed into a high interest. I've always had an interest in technology. So bringing technology in to support students and teachers has ended up being the passion of mine. And so finding tools that work for kids has been just a great journey for me in my career. You
guys started off with doing a trial of, I think it was 3 reader pens and 2 of the lingo pens. The lingo pen, by the way, is a single word translating pen that is great for people who just have no capacity maybe with English, or just beginning to learn English, and they need to have something that allows them to refer in their native language, but they have to also read their native language. So in your guys' case, you guys got the 5 pens, and then about a month later you came back, and I think we did like 30 pens. Didn't we do something like that?
Something like that.
And then I think it was about 3 months later you came back and we said, well, let's get 150 pens. And then last year you came and I think we got 450 pens. And in that process, you guys have identified certain things. So one of the big rollouts you had was in your special ed students. So tell us a little bit about identifying the special ed students and how the rollout of that particular aspect has gone. And then we can talk a little bit about the logistics. You know, we were talking earlier about how, you know, you get these pens and you don't realize, now what do I do? So talk a little bit about how you chose the reader pens for your special ed and how that went.
A couple of our teachers had found out or seen through advertisements or whatever, you know,
probably us
with
emailing
their emails,
you.
To the district about these scanning pens, and I had seen them as well, but hadn't really explored them too much. But then when one of our teachers at the high school level, who teaches students in a life skills classroom setting, said, you know, I think this is a tool that could potentially work for my students who aren't able to read on their own. And if they are reading, they're often having to read books that are just at a much easier level than they, you know, could be accessing.
Right.
So let's try this tool out. So we said, okay, let's do that, and reached out to your company, and just were so impressed with just even the trials that we did with the students. The first student we trialed with, I remember I was there and the teacher was there, and the student, you know, once we showed her how to use the scanning pen, she was just, you know, amazed that she was able to read a book on our own.
You know, we live in Washington, which is an inclusionary state. So what's the percentage of time that your students spend in a general classroom for your special ed students?
It varies. We really are, as a district and in partnership with the state, are really focusing on, giving every individual the time they need for specialized instruction, but also being able to get into the classroom. So percentage-wise, we have students who are in a general education setting for 80-90%, some of them 100% of their day, because we are implementing some co-teaching and classrooms, and we have other students that need more intensive support as well, so it varies.
With using the reader pen with your special ed, are they able, have you found at this stage that they're able to engage inside of a general classroom maybe a little more if they have that pen to be able to read? Have you seen that happen at all?
At this point, it's beginning to happen.
Yeah.
We're still in I would say the early stages, even though we've been on this journey for a couple of years, but in the rollout, and you've got factors like buy-in, the students wanting to use it when they're in a general education classroom, and they don't see other students using it. So that's been one of those barriers that we're trying to work through. But I do see we have students who have said, I can take this pen home and read for myself. I can read an assignment from class for myself. I don't have to have my parents or my sibling read for me, or I can just read a book. And so that's where we're seeing more of the students finding that this tool is so successful for them.
And that has to be so exciting.
Yeah.
I had just north of here, we gave these, or they bought some of these pens, and the first night, the special ed got a call from a parent. Now, how many times do you enjoy getting calls from parents? Not a whole lot, maybe. Yeah, it can depend. But she got a call from a parent, and the parent started crying. And she said, for the first time in my daughter's life, she came home and read a book. And it was because they had the pen. And so we're seeing some things like that, open doors that just weren't open prior to this. And I remember when we came and did the training with you guys, the second one I did, we had one of the teachers stood up and she goes, I got to say something about the reader pen. And she said, I have 3 students that have come into me and said, this pen has changed my life. And now, you were talking about buy-in, and I think that's something that many times we have, kids are going, oh, well, I don't want to be pointed out, or I wanted. Now, I've got a district in Illinois that's looking to buy one for every 9th grader and 10th grader in their district, no matter what their readability is. Now, they've identified, number one, that through the past 2 years, and I'd like you to think about this and maybe talk about this in Walla Walla a little bit. But in the last 2 years, even there was a newspaper article talking about, they're showing that we've lost 2 decades of reading growth in the last 2 years. And so they've said, we don't care what your readability is, we think you probably need some help to get back on track anyway. But I think what they did is they said, we're going to get one for everybody. And so I've actually used that example for some people and just said, if you have a student who's struggling, if you have enough pens, bring one in for everybody in the classroom and let everybody have one. And then all of a sudden it opens this door, because what happens is, and you've probably heard this, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but wow, this is cool, or I can't believe this, really just statements that just make kids want to check it out. So what have you guys seen in the last few years? Are you guys seeing some pretty major reading issues, major reading losses?
Yeah, I believe we have, just like many people all over the country are
everywhere.
seeing. There is a lot of loss in the reading skills that students have.
Was that one of the reasons why you guys looked at the reader pens and maybe pursued the reader pens a little bit, or?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. But we were looking at it again as when we first started, as the students who have had difficulties and struggles with reading over the long term. And they're just getting older and, you know, not able to access the type of literature and curriculum that their peers are accessing over the long term. And, you know, and while there are features on Chromebook that they can use speech to text, having the ability to have something to read a book.
Right.
And so it was not just a immediate, you know, oh, we're seeing this problem right now. For some of our students, this has been something they've
Lifetime.
struggled with all of their lives, pandemic or not.
Right.
And so having a tool that will promote more independence for these students is really what drove us to look at this.
So in launching this pen, you rolled out initially with your special ed students. Tell me a little bit about the demographics of Walla Walla. What is your mix that you would say here as far as percentage, say, of dyslexic students? Typically it's 10 to 15%. And then special ed, do you have kind of an idea off the top of your head?
Approximately 10%.
10%. And the demographic of English language learners or...
we have a large population of students who are multilingual learners, so particularly Spanish speaking. We have a couple of our elementary schools who are dual language schools, and then that carries on with the dual language program for the students who both want to learn the second language or who are learning English as a second language.
And by the way, this pen actually will read text and define text and go from text to speech in English, Spanish, and French. Do you know if they've had any opportunity to use the Spanish and try that at all?
I have some students. We've been working with the students in middle school and high school, and particularly with this most recent rollout of the pens. And when I was at the high school presenting this to the classes, there were students who, when I said, you can read in Spanish, you can, if you've got directions or a book you're reading and you want to look it up, and they were very excited about that fact. We have a couple students that we're looking at particularly where that is more of the barrier, or more than a couple students, but that is the barrier, is being able to have access to things that we'll read in Spanish. So yeah, we're definitely seeing that as a positive thing, and the kids are excited about it.
Great. Well, that's exciting to hear. I had a special ed teacher call me a little while back and said, you know, she doesn't speak Spanish, but she had special ed students who were in Spanish and she was trying to help them. And she didn't really know what to do, but so she took the pen, put it into Spanish, and then was able to at least allow them to hear what the words sounded like. They could hear the definitions. Now they'd be in Spanish, but they could hear the definitions and they could hear how to enunciate and pronunciate. As a speech language pathologist, when you hear this pen and you know that it does the definition, they can hear that word as many times as they want to. Is that a value for speech language, that pathologist, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. And so several of our speech and language pathologists in the district use these with some of the students during their sessions too. And that is one of the features I really like, is that, first of all, they can pronounce the word, they can hear it as many times as they want, so they can know how to pronounce a word. And being able to have that ability to look up a definition and to listen to it as many times as they need has been valuable, for sure.
Well, and because the pen will actually store those words on the pen, they can review it as much as they want. And so that's something, with the rollout, we've done a couple trainings, and I remember so distinctively coming into the second training and beginning to talk with you, and about a half hour into our conversation, I just went, I don't need to be here. You've done such an amazing job of really reviewing and researching it. Quite frankly, in the 20-some years of education that I've worked with, I've never seen anybody embrace something and really, I mean, you know this pen. I mean, it's pretty amazing to me. And it's funny because the teachers who do what you do and they really get to know the pen, what happens is they start recognizing different ways to use it. You know, plugging it in for allowing kids to be part of reading circles that they've never been a part of. Like we were just talking about, using it as learning the different languages. And you really had done such an amazing job on that, and I really commend you for that. We've mentioned it now several times, the rollout. Now you guys have, if I recall, over 550, 600 pens?
Yeah.
And initially those were all for your upper grades, right? Weren't you initially going middle school and up, or?
Yeah, well, when we first got the first 150 or so, I ended up, I wanted to divide them amongst the schools, knowing that we don't have nearly enough for all the students that we know could use them, but you know, with our budget, and you know, we wanted to see how it would work. So I distributed them to our resource teachers or special education classrooms that wanted to use them, and we distributed them, gave some class sets to all the grade levels that wanted them, that were willing to try these things out and to try to use them. So we started with that being more of a classroom set, not necessarily a one-to-one. And then when we looked at, all right, these are working and we're getting requests for more pens, and the teachers are seeing the value in it, seeing their students use it. So many kids are saying, this is a life changer. So we said, we need to have more. And so the opportunity with a grant came up
And that was the inclusionary grant, if I remember.
Yeah, it was the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion grant. I believe that's a Washington State grant. And so we were applying for some things for technology for students, and our director said, you know, this would be a great use of grant funds to be able to do this one-to-one for at least our special education students and our multi-language learners students who, or any student who particularly struggles with reading. So we applied for the grant and got, you know, funding for it. And so again, not enough to be supporting all the students at this point with that fund. So we, you know, had to make a decision, like, where are we going to focus this? And let's start this in the secondary level. If we start with middle school and high schoolers, because we don't have them as much time as we have our other kids, and let's get some tools in their hands that potentially they can use, you know, beyond school life. And so we decided to distribute the remaining pens. I kept some sets at the elementary level for classroom use, but we wanted to be able to check the pens out one-to-one for our secondary students. And we're identifying them based on students who, in special education, who have reading goals or you know, as an area of weakness for them. But again, that expands. We even have some students who are on 504s who, you know, they have made requests to get them. So we realize it needs to be expanded, but.
Have you guys actually written the pen into IEPs or 504s at all?
Well, we try to focus on what the student needs for, if they need assistive technology, what is the feature that they need. So writing in, a student needs to use a speech to text tool or needs access to, you know, word definitions or something like that. We'll put that into the IEP, and then within the present levels we'll say, you know, we're trying, or the student is using a scanning pen or a reader pen to be able to access their curriculum. So we're describing it in the IEP as the students are showing that, yes, this is making a difference for them, so that if the students should move or go to a different school, we know they need some form of speech to text, and that can be on the computer or on with a reader pen.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating to me. So many of our our customers use the text reader, and then they kind of hang the pen up. I think you've identified the multiple different functions of the text reader a little bit. So when you do a training, and I'd love to see you do your training because I'd probably learn something. But do you, obviously you focus on the text reader, but then do you really discuss the dictionary with them, or even the recorder or any of the other tools? Do you kind of go over that with the student, and are you seeing them embracing that?
Yeah, I am. Again, every student, some are just, the text reader is what they need right now. But when I'm going out and doing training, I'm trying to support staff and support students. And there are some students I'll meet one-on-one, or I'll meet with them in a small group. This year we've done whole class trainings at the high school and at the middle school. So we have the teachers there, and we have the whole class, so that everybody's hearing the same thing. And when I'm presenting it to the students, I am first of all telling them about all the features. I overview everything that's available. And what I found is if I start with the two main features to begin with, let's get used to what the text reader does. So we practice that, we practice setting up the pen, and then let's practice looking up definitions and hearing the pronunciation type features. And then I leave them to practice on that, and some students will explore on their own. They're like, oh, there's a voice recorder, great. And then I also talk to them about being able to put information onto a Google Doc. But I don't spend a lot of time training that in the first training session, because it's already enough for them, first I want them to focus on those features. And then I offer to come back and do more training as the students are ready, either whole group, small group, or individuals. So I have some students who I've introduced, probably the very first student I checked one out to the summer after she had a tutor, and I showed her the features. She was a high school student. I showed her the features, sent her the video of from Scanning Pen. That's a feature. They can break it down into whatever they need, and that student just started using everything. Right away. Other students, they're not. They don't necessarily see the value in that yet. So then that's where, when I'm training them, going back and saying, great, you've done all this. Did you know that, or do you remember we talked about this? Can I show you how to do this, and let's add to it.
And I think that you just hit on such a clear fact with, you got to know the pen. I mean, and you really did research this pen. I have to highly commend you on that. But you got to know it, so where you could actually, you had an inspiration of, and I loved what you just talked about. I didn't feed it all to them at once, because I've got a lot of districts that have 500, 600, 700 of these pens, and there's been such a dichotomy of rollout and such a variance of how people are using them. And because one of the worst things that can happen is these pens end up sitting in a closet, right? And because all of a sudden, we forgot how to use it, or the person that was, the passionate one left, but the more kids start seeing, or students start seeing, the variety of ways that they can use this pen, even like with the recorder, just going, hey, reminder, you got to do chapter 13 and the questions at the end of the chapter. Or even the teacher can put that on there. There's so many different little nuances that really support a student's life. And you've recognized that, and that's, just hearing you talk about, setting it up, and did the videos, you've already mentioned it, but the videos we sent you, did they helped you?
Yes.
And was the setup, was that an important aspect of it? Turning the auto reader off, and did you guys go through that experience where you went, oh, this auto reader, or maybe you found different things? Do you have a little thought about the auto reader on, the auto reader off, that type of thing?
Yeah, well, as I'm doing the initial trainings with the students, that is the very first thing that I do. After I tell them all the features, I run the setup with
Wizard,
them either to do the setup wizard or the total reset, because
right.
I say, sometimes it glitches, very rarely, but once in a while it freezes up. So you need to know how to do it. And if we're checking it out to you, you need to do this and not have to come to a teacher to depend on them. So we go through the setup, and I tell the students, you can decide if you want that reader feature on or off, but I recommend you have it off so that it doesn't
you'll
read
get a whole
every
paragraph,
time because some of the students will do that, and I've seen as they're initially practicing it, they don't like that it reads right away.
Right.
Some of them do, and I have one student in particular that we had recommended having it off initially, but the student has such a hard time tracking and keeping it. It's better for that student to be able to hear it each time he lifts it up and then puts it down. So for him, that works. But for the majority of students, I found that having reader off makes it so that they can listen to it as a whole. And also, as thinking about my kids that have difficulty processing language, to hold one part of a sentence, from beginning to the end of the page, as opposed to beginning to the end of a sentence, they can't. It's difficult to hold that language in mind and break it up mid-sentence and remember what you're reading and get meaning from it. They lose the context.
That was such a big thing for me as I grew in my knowledge of the reader pen. I mean, the first time I met you, I was pretty new to the company, and I've kind of learned in some ways along with you probably, but when I really identified that having the reader off and loading a full paragraph or a full page or several paragraphs. Ideally, I think it's using one paragraph at a time, watching it, listening to it, the learning modes, the visual, auditory, reading along, and then of course the kinesthetic event of loading it. It struck me that when we're using all those multiple learning modes, comprehension's going to rise.
Right.
And so have you found that the students like how it highlights each word and they're seeing each word? Have you found that they stop it ever and go, I need to know what that word means? Have they done some of that? Do you know?
I haven't seen it as much, but I'm not with the students as much as their teachers are.
Right.
So their teachers would see that. When we're practicing it, when I come back with some of the students where I've met with them multiple times, I have seen them, pay attention to the highlighting. I think that helps a lot to have the highlighting on. So I really, I have what the students are telling me they're using. I don't get to see it in everyday action like the teachers do, but that's another reason why I keep going back with the students that I'm training, so that I can have them have their input so that I know what to focus on when I'm training
And again,
others.
I think that speaks to I've been in this industry for 30 some years. I'm an old guy, right? And I've been in schools where they have closets full of technology that they've never opened. And it's been there for years because somebody went, well, I don't have to take the time. I don't know how to use this. It's too much hassle. And having someone who has done what you've done and really begin to understand the pen and start seeing the different perspectives of how to use it and when to use it. And I love that you were talking about your training, how you've done it in progression. And I think that's such an important thing, because once they get comfortable with something, then you open up another door. Now, a lot of kids, they're probably going to discover that on their own, aren't they?
Right.
They go,
Right.
God, this
A
is
lot
cool.
do.
I want to try to do, I want to
Yeah.
do this, I want to do that. And they'll come to you, hey, did you know? It does
Yeah.
this. And I the pen has a menu reader on it, and I always suggest to turn that off because I'll say, the kids get these pens and half of them know more about it in 5 minutes than we do after spending all this time. Hey, I just really appreciate so much really your investment in these pens, your investment even in sitting with us today. It means a lot to me, and we want to continue to partner. We want to see this through, and now you're really rolling into a stage where you're beginning to roll out to your ML, multiple language learners, and so with this rollout, one of the things that you've had to identify is, well, how do we keep track?
Yeah.
So what have you guys done?
Well, we've put an inventory number on each of the devices,
Pens,
and we put that in our inventory system. So we keep track of which ones were funded through the special education department, which ones were, and right now, in fact, before the break, we were one of our high school librarians has been working on giving the inventory numbers and everything to the students in the dual language program. And again, it's not because we don't want other students to use them, but we just need to be able to keep track. And so our librarians some of our librarians will be checking the students out. As we identify students who potentially would benefit from this, we'll check them out through our inventory system. And we have a master list of, those kids who are, the teachers are coming to us and saying, oh, I really think the student would benefit from it. So we keep track of it that way we have a couple lists going, I guess.
You mentioned librarians. Do you guys have just a set that's in the library?
Right now we do, and in the high school, our high school librarian has the pens, and I actually just learned this morning that some of the pens were sent to the elementary librarians as well.
Nice.
So we're still in process of figuring out what the best way to do this is. We've talked with a few of the librarians, and we said we don't want to give you more work to keep track of these, but right now the librarians are like, this is great to be able to have them here to be able to, if a student comes and is like, I want to read this book, I just can't, or they know a student is struggling, they can offer it, or go through us to say, hey, can we try it with the student, or does that student already have a pen? So we're in process of that, and we've been kind of changing procedures or refining it. We have a teacher at the high school who keeps track of all the ones she checks out to the students and then sends that to me. So we're just kind of figuring out what works best, because we know, this is an investment, and we want to be able to keep track of the devices, but we also want the kids to use them. And I've seen the same thing you've seen with different types of devices where it gets put on a shelf, and if we don't do the follow through, or just coming back and saying, hey, how's it going, and providing the support and keep track of them, and then they just get lost. And sometimes people are saying, well, let's order something new, let's get this, and if we know where our inventory is, we could say, hey, we've got this tool already, let's try that tool with the students. So.
Well, you guys you're just doing it so right. And I just want to say again, Holly, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I hold what you're doing in such high regard, and I've said that probably too many times today, but I really do. And just the fact that you've made this investment, not just a financial investment, but a time investment, right? And now you're seeing some rewards being reaped from that. And that's exciting. That's why we do this. If you're watching this video and you want to do what Walla Walla's done, start with a trial, start with checking one out. We do that for no obligation. We send it to you for 30 days, and you have experience to play with it, to explore it. Do it with, like you did, multiple different types of students. and multiple teachers even, and just kind of experience what this pen can mean. And you guys might do the same thing. You might go, yeah, let's get 50, no, let's get 100. I've got districts that have hundreds and hundreds of these pens. Some of them have 1,500 kids in their whole district. They have 700 of these pens. So it's something that's we're excited to see, and I love hearing those messages. This pen has changed my life.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thanks so much.